I read The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien for the very first time. And not only did it break me out of my horrible reading slump from the beginning of the year, but it revived my love of fantasy and adventure and made me feel like a kid again. Hello friends and welcome to my channel. My name is Haley and I am a Christian wife, homeschooling mother of 3, out to redeem my very own literary education. And in order to do that, I have started picking a male and female author for the year. And this year, my male author of the year is none other than J.R.R. Tolkien, which I am so excited about because I have read none of his books. I have seen none of the movies, and I am going into his world pretty much blind other than what I've seen from pop culture. And of course I had to start with The Hobbit, which is the prequel to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I get it. I'm a fan. It's one of my favorite books of all time now. I completely understand why people love Tolkien so much. Last year, C.S. Lewis was my male author of the year, and I read the Chronicles of Narnia for the very first time, which I also loved. That is also a favorite. But there is something about Middle-earth and this book and this story that feels a lot more elevated and a lot more complex. I knew going into Tolkien that he was going to be pretty high fantasy, and I was intimidated by that, but I don't know why, because it completely unlocked my imagination in my inner child. But what I love the best is that this book follows a 50-year-old hobbit. That's right. Near the beginning of this story, J.R.R. Tolkien says that at the time of Bilbo's adventure, Bilbo Baggins, he is about 50 years old or so. Can we please have more heroes and heroines that are in that season of life? And I just kept thinking about that as I was reading the story. He's 50 and he's going on an adventure. I'm 30 and I can still have adventures even though I'm a wife, I'm a mother. And I loved that. And in The Hobbit, if you've never read it, just like me, and you don't know what you're waiting for, but you're ready to dive in, it follows Bilbo Baggins, who is a hobbit. And the hobbits are your very ordinary, but really cozy creatures who live in these little holes in the beautiful hills. They have fully stocked pantries of good food and good breakfast. They love tea. They love gardening. It's wonderful. However, what they don't love is anything different or anything overly adventurous or out of the ordinary. But Bilbo Baggins comes from a line of hobbits who are called the Tooks, who are known for being a little bit different and having grand adventures. So one day when Gandalf the wizard just shows up on his doorstep and tells him he's going on an adventure, Bilbo is pretty reluctant about that and is honestly in complete denial until the next day a company of about 14 dwarves just show up at his house, expecting him to be the burglar of treasure stolen from them by a dragon. Bilbo is just kind of in shock at this, and is reluctant, but he's still kind of going along with it because he feels like he has no choice, because there's that small Tookish part of him that actually maybe does want an adventure. And so he decides to go with them. And what I love about The Hobbit is that it is a book about adventure, kind of for adventure's sake. This world is so incredibly complex that I can see all of the places that they go through and the battles they have. If I were to open up a map of Middle-earth and I were to look at the word Misty Mountains or Mirkwood Forest or Lake Town or Desolation of the Dragon, I could go there in my imagination because J.R.R. Tolkien wrote those settings and places so well. This was an adventure that you were along for the ride for. And what I loved about this book is that it was a realistic timeline for an adventure. I think it took them about a year to finally reach the Lonely Mountain where Smaug the dragon lives and is hoarding up all of this dwarf treasure. But I found that really realistic. You know, there are periods where they're kind of in limbo for 2 weeks, taking a particular part of a journey or several days. They have to find food, they have to sleep. Bilbo is constantly worried about his breakfast and missing his tea kettle, and not for the last time, which is a line J.R.R. Tolkien uses constantly in this. And I loved it because it felt so realistic. If you were a reluctant adventurer having to go on this adventure you didn't really want to be on, you would miss home, especially if you had a good and cozy home to think about and miss. And he always was thinking about breakfast and his tea, and I just found that to be relatable. However, what I loved about this book is that Bilbo Baggins begins to come into his own. As each part of the adventure takes place, he gets a little more agency. He gets a little more courage. He becomes more brave. He becomes more of a burglar and is really starting to get clever in how he is going about these different scenarios that they come into. Two of my favorite parts in this book are, one is when Bilbo faces Gollum, this creepy, who knows what kind of a creature that lives under a mountain, and is telling him all of these riddles to try to help get him out of there. And Bilbo is giving riddles back to him. It was just really cleverly done, and it was fun, and I was trying to figure out the riddles along with Bilbo. And then another favorite encounter that I had was Bilbo when he finally went up against Smaug the dragon and had to talk with him. I wasn't expecting the dragon to be able to talk, but I thought it was so cool that he could. And there's all of this lore and rules that you have to follow when you communicate with a dragon so that they don't take you in and, you know, eat you or burn you to a crisp or something. I don't know. But Bilbo was just so clever. And he actually, in the beginning, the dwarves were reluctant about him and they didn't think he was going to be an asset on this adventure. But it turns out that he was constantly saving them. This 50-year-old hobbit that nobody would notice because hobbits can kind of fade into the background, which made him a really great burglar. It was just so good. I loved his character. And I also loved the character of Gandalf. And The Hobbit is not an allegory in the way that Narnia is an allegory. So in Narnia, Aslan is Jesus, but in The Hobbit, Gandalf isn't necessarily Jesus, but he made me think about him for a few reasons. So Gandalf is this really wise wizard who goes along for the journey, but is constantly leaving Bilbo and the dwarves to themselves, but swooping in when it's really necessary and they really need his help. And this, to me, just as a Christian, makes me think about Jesus. Jesus is always with us. He always knows what's going on. And when we're in a real time of need, we can really feel his presence. And we know that he's pulling us out of a situation. But there are so many times that Jesus pulls out and he lets us learn what we need to learn to grow and mature and be better. And he trusts that it's going to happen, even if it's hard, even if it puts us in a tough situation. And so Gandalf in that way reminded me of Jesus. Like I said, J.R.R. Tolkien was a Christian, but I don't think The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy is necessarily an allegory, but Gandalf did make me think of Jesus in that way. And then another character that I really loved, and I thought it was a really cool, almost mythical character, was the character of Beorn, who is this half bear, half strong man who lives out in the wild alone, only eats bread and honey, and is surrounded by all of these animals that he cares for and that loves him. He is good and gentle, and yet at night he turns into this really ferocious bear who turns out to be an ally to Gandalf and to Bilbo and to the dwarves because he hates the goblins just as much as they do. But I thought his myth and his character was really, really interesting. I don't know if that was inspired by an actual myth or something along those lines. So if you know that, please let me know in the comments. I'd be interested in reading that. But I loved this book, all of the lore and this just world building about the way that dwarves are characteristically and elves are characteristically and goblins and these wargs, which are like goblin wolves. I don't know. It was great. This book really felt like a book for adventure's sake. because by the end of the book, Bilbo doesn't really care about the treasure. He doesn't really care much for gold or anything. I think he was just proud of himself that he did it and he went for it and he had the great adventure. But when he comes home, he's home and he's happy to be there. And I think we need more of that in stories, because in a lot of stories, most people are ready to forsake their homes and never look back. So it was really great to read a book that made home actually enjoyable. The adventure was really, really fun, but it was great to return back to that place of love and comfort. And so I really enjoyed The Hobbit. J.R.R. Tolkien's world building is fantastic. His humor is unmatched. And in a lot of ways, it actually reminded me of C.S. Lewis's humor in the Chronicles of Narnia. I can definitely see why the Inklings were best friends in that way, because they have similar humor. So that was really fun. And I watched the movies with my husband after reading this book, and I have to say, I wasn't impressed by the Hobbit movies. They turned this book into a 3-part trilogy and really added in a lot of stuff that wasn't in here. And pretty much anything that my husband said he didn't really like was happening in the movies. I was that person that was like, well, that's not in the book. So that's probably why. It's not in the book. The book is better. And it is better. So if you've seen the Hobbit movies, the book is better. And there's a lot of storylines in those movies that just don't happen in here, or don't happen the way that the movie says that it does. So I didn't really care that much for the movies. I felt like they had a kind of a dark tone, almost darker tone, whereas The Hobbit has a really light, fantastical, adventurous tone, and so it was really fun. And so I think if you've never read The Hobbit, spring or summer would be a great time to go on an adventure. Most books to me feel like a specific season. I don't know why. I'm a seasonal reader, so I will read books that feel like a certain season, and this one felt like spring or summer. So if you've never read The Hobbit, what are you waiting for? Pick it up. I highly recommend it, and I cannot wait to read the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I almost want to dive in right now, but I'm going to take a little bit of a break. I'm going to focus on my female author of the year in March, which is Lucy Maud Montgomery, and read some of her works. And then I'm going to revisit the Lord of the Rings trilogy probably at the beginning of April. I would like to read that in the summer because it feels like a summer trilogy to me. I don't know why. I've never even read the books, but adventures feel like summer. Fantasy feels like summer. So I'll probably get to them then. But if you have read The Hobbit, please let me know in the comments below, what was your favorite place? What was your favorite character? Who do you think I'm really going to enjoy meeting in the Lord of the Rings trilogy? Just get in the comments and gush about The Hobbit, because I'm totally willing to do that with you. Thank you all so much for being here. I will see you next time. Happy reading!